a person that nobody wants to see during a pledge. So just being aware there. So again, Representative Speakman.
Thanks, and thank you for bringing us together. This is good timing. We're just getting underway, as you know, in the General Assembly. The Senate's a little bit ahead of us. So as Carrie said, I believe the committee assigned, we have a whole new leadership in the House this session. And Speaker Shekarchi is just getting things organized. We're just figuring out how to meet remotely in our committees. We're meeting at the vets, as you know, for our sessions, and we're figuring out how to sign things without touching them and all of that. So all of that's taken some time to organize. So my understanding is, and perhaps Rep. Knight has more information on this, that we will be receiving our committee assignments on Thursday or Friday. Right now I'm on HEW, but education is going to be pulled out and given a separate committee. So that will be renamed Health and Human Services. And I'm on oversight. I've requested to stay on HHS and on oversight. And I think we're going to be assigned an additional 1 or 2 committees, depending on the speaker's plans. So I have requested municipal and housing. Housing has been added as to be a sort of parallel to the Senate. Housing has been added to municipal government to highlight the new leadership on both sides, not new leadership on the Senate side, but leadership's interest in working on some housing legislation. So in terms of my priorities, I've resubmitted my PFAS bill, which I had in last year, and it was heard, but then we shut down for COVID. And that's about testing water for PFAS, which is I won't get into the details, but that would affect statewide. The bill that Planner Rulli asked me to submit last year about tax incentives when a business relocates from one town to the next, I will also resubmit. I hope to do some work on mental health and substance use disorder legislation. There's a bunch of gaps and changes that need to be made there. And that's something of personal interest to me, and I'm hoping to fix that. Rep. Knight and I are both working on nursing home legislation. This crisis has revealed lots of gaps there. One thing that needs to happen is increase Medicaid reimbursements. Don't know where that money's going to come from, but there is a new sheriff in Washington, and he seems to have a money tree that he can shake pretty hard. So we do need to get some more money into the state for nursing homes and a whole bunch of other health services. I'm also a supporter of legalizing marijuana recreationally. It makes no sense to have Rhode Islanders paying taxes in Massachusetts to buy their marijuana. So I would like to legalize here and with all the attendant safety measures and keep those tax dollars here. So those are some of the things that I hope to work on. Yes, so that's, any questions, or you want to do that after?
Yeah, let's do that after.
Perfect.
Yeah, that would be good. So Representative Knight, are you prepared?
Sure.
To speak?
Are you, well, I'll just say this. I mean, I just following on Rep. Speakman's sort of tack there. What I'm interested primarily locally is keeping DOT's feet to the fire around the bridges, the bike path bridges. That is my number one local concern, and we're doing everything we can to keep them time on task. It is a difficult job, to say the least, because I think, although no one's said this to the delegation, I think, frankly, DOT is interested in roads, and when bike paths come along, maybe not so much. But we're doing what we can, and I know all of us are doing what we can to keep that on the front burner and keep up the pressure, and any lever that appears while I'm in office before those, while those bridges are being built, if we can pull it, I will. With respect to my legislative agenda, I have a few things in. It's mostly greatest hits from the years past. I am expect to sponsor once again an assault weapons ban or co-sponsor an assault weapons ban and a high capacity magazine ban. I have a number of bills in around criminal justice reform to resolve some really just some poor practices on the ground in our courts and prisons. I am working with Rep. Speakman on the nursing home fix, and fix is probably a wrong word, but a bill to ameliorate some of the causes of the infection spread that we saw during the pandemic. And what else is there? I remain concerned about Rhode Island's budget. We have a structural deficit that no one ever seems to be interested in fixing. I hope that with different leadership, both in the governor's office and at the top in the House of Representatives and a significantly changed Senate, that there will be some efforts around that. I'm also interested in passing some significant environmental legislation this year. One that is important to the town is increasing the capacity for renewable energy, which ties directly to the project at the golf course. And I'd like to get rid of plastic bags in the state. I think that's doable this year. So there's a lot on the plate. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of energy. We'll see where this year's goes. It's going to turn a lot on how this pandemic plays out and just our ability to work together. But the issues have not gone anywhere while the pandemic has affected us over the last year.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of repeats, a lot of greatest hits. Senator Felag.
Thank you very much. Basically, my committee assignments are the same. I'm the vice chair of the Finance Committee and also the chair of the Special Legislation and Veterans Affairs Committee. We'll be doing a lot in terms of the veterans, in terms of trying to help them out and trying to find out different mechanisms for the funding of the Veterans Home and its operation. Part of the problem in the budget process is that it seemed like the governor in the past underfunded them so that the General Assembly would have to take their initiative to fund it to the full amount. My goals and my responsibilities are mostly around the budget. As a Senate, we're meeting at Rhode Island College. We've met every Tuesday. And then on Thursday, we've been having Finance Committee meetings. The last committee meeting we had last Thursday was regards to the COVID funding and how much funds that we have left. Rhode Island's received about $1.8 billion and roughly has around 350 million left. And it's broken up into about 20 different categories. Those categories are housing, education, distribution of the vaccine and the testing and all those different aspects. This Thursday, we're going to be focusing on our general revenues, which is the most important aspect of the budget because it provides the template for how much money we have for the next fiscal year. We talk about the structural deficit. It's obviously a lot higher because the revenues are way down. But by the same token, we've always had a structural deficit because general operations are always going to be a little bit more from one year to the next. Can we control it? It all depends if we get assistance from the federal government. And it's important that we get that assistance because otherwise we got to make sure that our businesses are open so our sales tax can be on par, and obviously our state income tax is going down. The two major components of our general revenues are the income tax and the sales tax. They comprise about 70%. So when they're down, it really puts a burden on our funding. This is also the last year that we have the educational funding formula. So the question is where do we go from here? Do we continue that successful program where we've contributed about 30 million a year or not? And so I'm hoping to see that we continue to fund education. Other priorities I have are I just put in my 27 bills or something from last year, where a lot of them never really got much attention because of the COVID impact and the real shutdown of the General Assembly, as we couldn't find a way to have public hearings on these bills. So we're hoping to have a structured public hearings on the bills. We're still trying to go through that process of how open we can be in terms of an open government. I just are worried about when gun bills and things of that magnitude that come up, that we're on the dais, or those that are in that Judiciary Committee till like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, how much longer they will be when people are able to testify from their home and wake up at 2, 3 in the morning and continue the dialogue all through the next morning and possibly next day. So there has to be some mechanism of a time slot in terms of what those meetings are going to look like. It's like I say, other bills that I've put in for a number of years now, in terms of increasing the earned income tax credit for those low-income earners. And then also when I put in last year relative to prescription drugs, to allow pharmacists an opportunity to provide what is the lowest price or generic price for different drugs and provide that as an alternative. And again, there's other bills, but we're here more to listen to you and to see what your priorities are. So.
Carrie, Council President Cronin, if I could just add one thing. I have heard, and I'm sure that Senator Feeleg and Rep. Knight have heard every day, multiple calls and emails about vaccinations. That is it was unemployment and PPP at the beginning, and now it is vaccinations. And folks are frustrated and scared and angry and all of that. And so we had session tonight in the House, and all of my colleagues were talking about this. So this is a thing that's garnering a lot of attention right now. It's not clear what any of us can do about it or what the truth is actually, right? There's lots of data flowing around, but that is something that is high on the immediate agenda, not the legislative agenda, because we don't control the Department of Health. But I did mean to mention that. That is of considerable, and I'm sure you guys hear it too. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say of, the priorities that are on my list, managing, dealing with, and how we will get from where we are right now to the, fingers crossed end of this pandemic, and, how the legislature and how, you folks are able to meaningfully help us in the East Bay, and in Warren specifically. I mean, in regard to maintaining local testing, having that easily available as it is right now, and ensuring that we don't lose that access. And then, the coordinating of vaccinations. It's what I hear about all day, every day. And it's what I think about, as I'm in my business and, watching the world go by. So, any information that you have, and as soon as you have it, we appreciate. I mean, Kate is on it all the time, and, we communicate regularly, but how this all rolls out over the next few weeks to few months is going to save lives. So, so Kate has put together a list of priorities, most of which we have seen over the past, few years since I've been involved in this process. Do any members of the council have specific priorities that are that Kate has not identified on her list that you'd like to bring forward right away? A hand raised. Councilman Kalenda.
I don't know if, and thanks, Madam President. I do have some responses to what our reps have brought forward. And if this is the time, I would like to present to Rep. Speakman June. You made mention, it seems like to be on the top of your priority list is the legalization of marijuana. I have moved my needle on this subject matter over the past few years, but some of my concerns are what is in the process for doing testing at the scene of a motor vehicle operator that has been stopped by police. And like we have with drunk driving, we have, the tools necessary to test at the scene. There's nothing like that for the marijuana testing. And for law enforcement to get behind this, I think this is something that needs to be addressed one way or another. That's first. Second, the way the distribution, if we're going to have these dispensaries or we're going to have these storefronts that are selling like we have in Massachusetts, what's going to be the revenue split source-wise? If it's all going to go back to the state of Rhode Island and the general fund, then, are we actually putting it back into the social programs that need to be addressed for it? Is it going to go in towards education? Is it going to go towards public safety? So I would feel more comfortable being able to support something like that and having my reps being going forward in the State House if we had a plan. I'm going to move to Rep. Knight. Jason, great on the DOT bridges, because obviously that has something that's vested in the town of Warren and the town of Bristol. The assault weapons ban and the high capacity ban, I thought that magazine was already addressed last session, but if it hasn't, bring us up to speed. And the nursing home fix, obviously, something like that needs to be put in place, because where we went with what happened with the pandemic and just the situation that they got into that they're almost not able to get out of. And then you mentioned the plastic bags. I think the plastic bags is an easy one. I wouldn't want to really waste a lot of our time at the legislation area. It almost seems like every city in town has banned the plastic bags. And then the renewable energy, we have a vested interest in the town of Warren because of where they're planning on putting it. And there are individuals in that neighborhood that do have certain questions about the infrastructure and how it's going to affect their quality of life. So if we can maintain and keep these on point, I think it would be helpful to what I'm hearing for the folks that I see on a day-to-day basis. And that's pretty much it I have for now, Carrie. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just respond to a couple things just real quick? Carrie, is that all right?
Yeah, I was going to say, Jason, if you want to respond, and then June, if you have anything to add, given the questions on your priorities.
I would, on the gun thing, we just, it's a perennial bill. Well, perennial for the last few years, and we frankly just didn't get to them last year. It's a big push, but as of today, right now, there's no action in Rhode Island around assault weapons or high capacity magazines. So it's a legislative push. I don't want to hone in on June's topic, but I will say on the marijuana front, this is my daily business. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, so I'm well up to speed on DUI law and current practices. And we are seeing, frankly, we're not seeing any uptick in DUIs that are just solely marijuana. It's still mostly booze, even with the dispensary across the line. When you do get that case that the police officer made the decision to arrest, and it's clear that it was based on marijuana, the combination of practices that we have right now seem to be getting the job done, particularly the ability of police to do sort of an enhanced screening with a drug recognition expert. I find myself, arguing against that kind of thing in court all the time, but that is a tool in the toolbox for police. Plain old observations, like we used to do it around alcohol. If the guy's just stumbling, fall down drunk, fall down intoxicated, it doesn't really matter what it is. They can't drive the car. They're going to be guilty. And increased use of blood tests, because blood tests, you take them to the hospital, the blood's going to show the cannabinoids. So law enforcement's dealing with it. There's no magic bullet like there is with a breathalyzer, but there are ways to deal with it.
Are we going to discuss the specifics of legislation? I thought this was going to be topic oriented.
You can do whatever you want, Joe.
No, not you. I'm sorry, Mr. President. Because, I mean, we capped this meeting at 2 hours, and if we have, 10-minute discussions on an individual, I don't know, this just seems like more of a depth, more detail than I think just we
Well,
should.
let me give a very quick answer, excuse me, Councilman, to Councilman Kalinda's question about marijuana. I will leave it to the scientists and the law enforcement professionals to deal with the testing issue. I understand what you're saying. With regard to how you structure who gets the licenses and where the money goes, I can assure you that any legislation that I will support has a slice of the revenue coming back to the hosting community. I am committed to that for sure. The governor has a rather vague proposal, and there are some other, the governor's not going to be the governor anymore, so the proposals are yet to be fully defined. But I understand what you're saying about tax revenues coming back to the local community, and I am committed to that. So thanks.
Rep. Knight, I apologize if that
No, it-
was not targeted at you. It should have been more actually a discussion point in the beginning. I mean, not a discussion point. I should have brought it up in the beginning to just ask about the format of the meeting. So I apologize if I sounded curt.
Nothing to apologize for, Councilman. Sorry.
No, thank you.
It's been a long day.
Councilman Heckard, in a moment, Councilman DePasquale, to finish your point, do you have any recommendations, preferences, or something to contribute here that would change the direction or further identify the way you'd like to see it go?
This discussion or the topic of getting dragged into the weeds. If Rep. Speakman wants to bring that up, I think that's great. And I think if Councilman Kalenda has any specifics on the bill, that he should bring those to the forefront in the future when it's in committee, and hopefully bring it to the council so we can strengthen his position if we agree on it, and send a resolution and support the work that she's trying to do for the town of Warren and the state of Rhode Island. I just didn't think we were going to get into the minutia this evening.
Okay. Councilman Heckard?
Well, Joe, I understand your point. And, maybe we could utilize the very comprehensive list that Manager Michaud put together. And we could actually just go down that list and touch quickly on some of these major issues that I think are important for Warren. And as they always have been, most of them have come up before, but it would be nice to get updates on some of these issues. So if that's acceptable, I think it would be a good way to touch base on many of these items.
That was the intention after each of you had an opportunity to speak. Mr. Hanley?
Yeah, my concern is what they are hearing about the car tax, because if that gets pulled back, that's going to put us in a pinch like it did last time, where we're going to have to really jack back up our automobile tax. And it would, I know you can't rush it, but it would be nice to know before we actually get at least a feel how it was going to go before we get that deep into our budget process.
Well, as far as that's concerned, you'll know when the governor submits his budget. His or her budget, depending on who's submitting the budget. The budget is usually the template that the House and Senate go by. So that will be the first indication of whether or not the new governor is going to be in tune with what's taking place currently, which has been set out through a 7-year period of the elimination of the car tax or not. Last year, the governor decided to only fund half of it at 11 million, where the structured thing that was voted on by the General Assembly was over the 7-year period. So we were able to find that additional 10 or 11 million to fully fund it. So you'll have the first indication when the governor comes out with his budget in middle of March or before then.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, before we start, Kerry,
Mhm.
is it possible for Kate to email that list that she has or something, or text it to us with a picture so we can follow along as to what topic she's going to go through.
It came as an attachment to an email from Clerk Speroni, I think, right?
Yeah, you did receive it earlier today.
Okay.
Yeah, it was shared to you along with the meeting agenda and the login.
You can share her screen and everyone can see it.
Mhm.
It came from Kate Wally.
Only I can.
So, Kate,
Yep, I just resent it to Senator Felag just so in case he's looking at his email, but I can share
Okay.
my screen if you'd like me to.
does everybody have the list in front of them, or would it be preferable to share the screen? I don't know what
Got it.
you all have it?
Can't we put it up so the public could see it?
I can share if that's what you'd like. I got it right here.
Yes, thank you, Kate.
Okay. Let me zoom this down just a little. All right.
So on the first one, I know that Rep. Kassar was working on something with Rep. Ucci, who is no longer in the House, about a broader plan for managing the landfill. I don't know what the status of that is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, just from my personal perspective, I think obviously we're very happy that 15% increase has been temporarily delayed, but the long-term solutions for the landfill are obviously a concern, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Yes, I am.
I know there's been discussion amongst different groups about exploring the potential for waste to energy, which currently is not allowed in the state of Rhode Island, and whether or not that is, whether or not the technology exists to make that an environmentally responsible choice. But I think this 15% increase is just the first of many increases that we'll be seeing as the capacity of the landfill continues to be reduced. So certainly a concern.
Is there any consideration for a statewide pay-as-you-throw? Because I know that's been a very successful program in many communities. It really reduces solid waste. It's maybe that's too heavy a lift to go statewide with it, but it is difficult to do it town by town as well.
It was something that Rhode Island Resource Recovery actually brought to us at one point as something that they were exploring, but I haven't heard anything about it recently. So I just threw it in there as a consideration because I think at this point, everything should be on the table personally.
Well, it's effective. It does work because when people have to pay directly, so they think about what they put in that solid waste container as opposed to recycling. So I know it's successful.
It's hard to know if anybody has anything they want to contribute with the share screen on. So we can either sort of speak freely if you have something you'd like to contribute to the this first item, or we can move on. I think that anything to do with the cost of waste and reducing what we're sending and saving costs there is obviously hugely critical to our budget and our environment. Sorry, I've got dogs barking. I had asked earlier about the how the tolls on our vehicles, if that has, what the impact of that has been so far this year, how that has gone up. And apparently the pass-throughs from our contractors doesn't start until later. So that's not an issue for us yet, but that is looming.
Right, that's something that I've discussed with all the legislators in the past. And I know that was something that was at top of mind at one point, but kind of was overtaken by events, I think,
Right.
to most of the great
And
extent.
Rep. Knight and I were working on that right before COVID happened. And we can start that conversation again. We were working with House Fiscal to see about what could be done about that. There's a constitutional problem with, this is the tolls for the trash trucks, right? That you're talking about? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, with exempting certain groups of vehicles that where trash trucks from out of state have to pay it and trash trucks from in-state don't. There's apparently a constitutional problem with that, but Jason, we can pick up that conversation again with House Fiscal, see what they can come up with.
Yep.
Okay. The school funding formula, this is a perennial favorite on the list of priorities, and, you know, having a predictable way to budget. I don't think that's something that any of you are can be surprised that's on our top.
Can I ask about that? I mean, like, what does that mean? I mean, the formula is predictable. It seems to me a lot of the problems that come in terms of budgeting they come out of the joint finance committees and the competition between the two towns. I understand that Bristol Warren used to have like a what do you call it? A regional bonus, right? And transportation bonus. And I understand all the issues with the formula sending that away. So are we talking about something predictable, like there's something happening in the school budget that makes it unpredictable? Or is this, put another way, should there be a bullet under school funding formula that says we need more money?
Both, I would say. Just when I wrote that, I was thinking about as Senator Phelan mentioned, that the school funding formula, you know, we're in the last year, and it'd be good to know what the plan is for next year. You know, I've seen the report that came out, the legislative study, and I think it's full of good recommendations, and it'd be, you know, just good to know it's going. More money is always helpful. But then just as far as knowing what the school district's going to get, because it's based on the census of students, and we've had issues over the past few years where that census seems to swing quite widely, and all of a sudden we'll find out, okay, you know, the Warren side of the school funding formula has lost 50 kids, so now we're going to lose X number of dollars of funding, and that's after the budget's already been kind of reviewed and approved. So it makes it difficult when they go with that March census and we don't get the information until maybe the end of March or April about the student census, and then that can change the budget picture in kind of midstream.
Has anyone ever gone to RIDE and tried to crack open that bureaucracy to get an accurate number ahead of time prior to the budgeting process?
What number is that in regards to accurate?
The student census for the next year.
Yeah, they do it twice a year.
Yeah.
Once in March and once in, I think, October. So they'll give us the October numbers up until they have the numbers for the end of March, and we don't get any interim numbers. I think that was something we tried to get last year and we weren't able to. It seems to me like everybody knows how many students are enrolled in the school at any given time, and it really shouldn't just be a twice a year data point. So I don't really know what the holdup is there.
Rep, there are several issues. One doesn't necessarily involve state correction or legislative correction. What I mean to say is there are several different issues, all of which impact the two towns differently. And then when you put the political leverage that one town holds over the other, the desire to go to the table to negotiate in the best interest for both towns has never happened yet. So where we end up being is we have fiscal calendars that aren't coordinated. We have identified points like you just brought up that come in, I won't say sporadically, but they come in at times that they don't benefit the funding process. And then you have 3 different fiscal calendars that aren't coordinated: Bristol's, the state, as well as Warren. The only way we're ever going to not be afraid of this sort of Damocles is if we sit down and negotiate a once and for all, this is how we're going to live, not a best case scenario, a new set of rules that make this no different than the sun's going to come up tomorrow. And that we're not there.
Negotiate that at the local level, right?
And then it has to be agreed upon by both towns. Then it has to be sent to the state. Then the state has to approve it. So when you think about all of these moving parts, what's ended up happening is we went to court because we had to. Then there was a lot of bad blood. Now you've heard me say this all the time. And if
I know.
heard me, you can ask. This is our biggest crisis right now. If this were to happen, this is our biggest fiscal impact. It'll cripple the town.
I have an idea that I want to just throw out there. I don't mean to start a discussion. I'm happy to talk about this with anyone, but I think, and it's a little extreme, but in all the conversations over the last few years about how to break the budgeting logjam for the regional school district, I'm sorry, I can't see all of you. There we go. I have an idea, right? Remember, we had the conversation about setting up an independent tax district for the school, right? And there's a lot of issues that come into whether or not you can actually do that. Out of that conversation, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it seems to me that Warren, just by virtue of the way the population works out in the enabling legislation, Warren is always on the short end of the stick. It never has a true equal partnership with Bristol when it comes to funding the schools.
Correct.
And you can't do much around the enabling statute, I think constitutionally, because it's kind of one person, one vote. And let's face it, Bristol's bigger, right? So Warren ends up, even though it has a separate political identity, always trailer hitched to how Bristol's political world is changing, but you don't have any say in it because you don't have any votes, right? You guys basically get told what to do by Bristol, and you have no power to change that because you don't have representation.
Well, just to be fair to anyone listening, we do have the process. We're part of a committee. What you're speaking about is the 6-3 representation. So everybody on these committees are supposed to be representatives of the body, the school committee or the joint finance committee. But what you're referring to is correct in regards to when it has to do with Warren, it can turn into a 6-3, or Bristol, it can turn into a 6-3.
So all that is background to this idea. I'm gonna float here publicly.
Yep.
Right. And we can do with it what we will. But I know that the Joint Finance Committee is it's made up of members of both town councils, right? So Bristol Town Council effectively runs the Joint Finance Committee because they have more seats and they always put their people, their Bristol town councilors, onto that committee. You might break this logjam if we created a statute that basically said you can't sit you can't sit on the council and you can't sit on the Joint Finance Committee at the same time. In other words, independent at-large elections for the Joint Finance Committee. Or if you wanted to, I think that's the only way, because you're going to have to break the influence of the town councils over the Finance Committee so that you have a true and independent financing committee for the school district, like everybody else does in the state, where the school committee is independent from the town council in Barrington, in North Kingstown, in
that's
Woodstock.
because but the problem there is the process having to do with the lack of bonding, the financial Kate, what's the words, because of the two towns being separate, the JFC, we don't have a financial town meeting. All the other towns that you're speaking about, other than the 4 that are regionalized, everybody else shares one financial town meeting to include their schools. This is going to take a whole legislative oversight, which they don't want to hear it.
All I'm suggesting is that I see the linchpin in this problem between Warren and Bristol and the funding of the school districts, and sort of Warren getting its fair share in terms of representation. The linchpin is the Joint Financial Council and the You gotta have representation on that board in order to make it fair. And it's not fair the way it is because of the way the structure is. There's a lot of other problems. There's financial town meetings, there's bonding, there's just the straight amount of money. But if you had a school district geographic region, and from that region you ran at-large people for the Joint Finance Committee, or a certain number from each, or divided up into wards, or did whatever, and then you could have a truly independent Joint Finance Committee. You could work with the school committee, and you could make some progress on this issue. Just my 2 cents. I represent Warren. I got nothing to do with Bristol, but I see Warren continually getting the short end of the stick, and I don't like it.
Thank you, Rep. Knight, for your suggestion. I'm sure at another time and discussion, we could go through it further, but an at-large election, given the populations, might put Warren at an even greater disadvantage if you think about it. And anyways, it's an interesting interesting thought. I think every year we have the discussion of how the makeup of the JFC and the makeup of the school committee doesn't seem to adequately represent the town of Warren when it comes to making financial decisions. And the enabling legislation as it is, and as it has never been really truly reviewed and pulled apart, is what it is. So I don't know what that major force needs to be to change it all, but every year we come to this same place. So unless anybody has anything else to add on the funding formula, the second part of this.
Well, excuse me if I may interject. The big potential change here would be if there's been a structural change to the funding formula. The Senate had their own committee last year that looked at the funding formula. So there may be some legislation that is put in, but because of COVID, I don't think they'll put that in, have enough time to put that in place for this year. But the funding formula is at its 10th year. So there's a review going on of the whether or not to tweak it one way or the other. One of the things I would like to see implemented within that formula is to provide some extra funding for those regional school districts like Warren. Because for years I've put in the regional bonus, but it's had some discussion, so it really never went anywhere.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Let us know how that it seems like a high priority for education to see that kind of legislation go through, but I think we do need to move on given the ticking time. The second part is one-time federal funding for COVID relief should be exempt from maintenance of effort requirements. I think that makes good sense. Do any of our legislators have an opinion on the feasibility of that actually happening?
Doesn't sound out of the realm of reality. What do you think, Rep. Speakman?
Well, I don't know how you accomplish that. Do we pass a law that says that? Do we?
No, it's a carve out. It's a carve out in the budget.
Yeah, and I don't know how the COVID federal funding is represented in the budget that's coming up. So the mechanism for making this happen, Kate, do you know
So
what the fix would be?
I think it's going to depend on how the ESSER funds get distributed from the federal stimulus that was passed in December. I think that's going to be the big kind of deciding factor. We don't know how that's going to happen yet. If that goes directly to the school districts, then it'll be one thing. And if it gets distributed through RIDE, then it may be something else. And, if it's in the previous rounds of federal aid, it seems like it was basically a money swap. The RIDE withheld certain municipal aid or school aid and then replaced it with federal funds, in which case it was a wash. But if this latest round of funding ends up being a net gain to the districts, then that's when I think it would something would need to be done to exempt it from maintenance of effort. And we've talked to RIDE about it, the League of Cities and Towns, and they don't seem to, they're not 100% sure if it's something they could do, but it does seem like it may need some legislative action in order for it to happen.
I think that's one sentence in the budget. I mean, I would defer to Senator Felag. Obviously, he's our budget expert, but it seems like it's doable, right? Because there should be an accounting that, you know, in everybody's spreadsheets this year of what money came from the CARES Act and what money came from just normal sources.
Correct.
Okay. Car tax phase out and other municipal aid. We touched, I think a number of you touched on this in your initial statement. Again, we're at budgeting dates, not meeting up, and everybody's sort of operating on a different calendar. This seems to be a statewide problem through that hits a lot of different funding issues. So it's
Kerry. Well, Kerry, the problem is that the governor and the executive branch have to submit their budget based on the November revenue estimating conference. And so usually the revenues increase from year to year. So she has to, or he has to do it based on the revenue projections in November. So, you know, the car tax needs to continue being fully funded. But the problem is that the amount of money in the next 3 years are going to be 27 million this year's budget coming up in fiscal year 22, then 34 million, then 57 million. So where do we get that money from is anybody's guess. And then the budget is finalized based on the May revenue estimating conference. So that's why there's going to be some unpredictability in that budgeting process. The only way communities can get around it, as I've said every year for the last 5 years, is for municipalities to do what East Providence does. Start their fiscal year in September, run a 15-month budget and do it out to September. Then you'd have exact predictability of what you're going to get for the car tax, the school funding, all the other mechanisms and funding that you get from the state.
Well, you told me that for 20 years.
Probably. And
Yeah,
and you know, that's just basically how the municipal government has the same timelines as state government.
So what's holding us up from doing that?
Nothing.
Nothing. We haven't done it though.
Well, you could have the emphasis to submit a 15-month budget.
all right, let's talk about that offline. Broadband. This is the effects of COVID have really highlighted how desperately inadequate access is to internet and whatnot across this community and the entire state. So there's a resolution that Kate shared earlier that's in the works on broadband. It seems like there's some positive movement. Are any of our legislators involved in that? Have the rest of the council seen that?
I don't think, I hadn't forwarded it yet because I just received it this morning, and I'm not sure if our legislators are aware. There was a legislation that was introduced yesterday, from what I understand. And I'm trying to find it here. It's a House Bill 5148. It was submitted by Ruggiero, Blajewski, and Kazarian. And it's an act related to state affairs and government, the Rhode Island Broadband Development Program, which establishes a broadband coordinator and council. So that's something that I just found out about this morning, which is an interesting and exciting development in this whole topic of broadband, as far as I'm concerned.
And I think this was the legislation that Rep. Rosario had planned to introduce last year prior to COVID. And Representative Speakman and Representative Knight had met with myself and Ashley Medeiros, who was at that time Connect Greater Newport. And so now it's finally coming to fruition. I know Kate had a conversation yesterday with Commerce. I had one this morning. I mean, to the extent that open meetings are going to continue to be online, and the need for telemedicine and people working remotely and distance learning, we are trying to participate in a pilot program through Commerce. Some of that money might be coming through the second round of CDBG money that Commerce has been sitting on. But I submitted something to Commerce today that I think they're interested in, that for little money, we could set up a pretty impressive pilot program to access the Ocean Network at Town Hall, connect public safety, have a dish on the top of one of our buildings here on Main Street, and hit the Metacom area, another dish either at the middle school or elementary school, and possibly at 426 Metacom, to make wireless broadband available. We would be able to set up a mesh network on Main Street and Water Street for businesses. So we seem, based on Kate's conversation yesterday afternoon and us jumping on it today, seems like we've got some traction to kind of roll this out. So yeah, I think Kate and I are both very excited that this is finally seeing the light of day. I think we both have concerns with what the makeup of the steering committee, if you would, that's been proposed is, but finally there's some recognition that Rhode Island needs to get in line with the other 49 states and our territories and prioritize access to broadband.
Yeah, and Rep. Ruggiero has been working on this for a number of years, and you're right, she is connected with she was connected to Ashley. She understands all of the technology and the last mile and all of that. For whatever reason, she's had a hard time getting headway in the House on this. I don't know what the status is of things in the Senate. If there are elements of her bill that you think need to be tweaked, let us know, and we can work with her on that. Yep. And also that whole big proposal that you just talked about, if you submitted something to Commerce, you said?
With Sue Lee, who is kind of their technology guru.
Yeah.
And these are kind of, I don't know, Kate, would you call these offline conversations or are they formal conversations? But I mean, it's getting momentum very quickly in the last 36 hours. It
was, I don't know what, ironic, interesting to see during Governor Raimondo's confirmation hearings today. Her Department of Commerce, the U.S. Department of Commerce, has broadband as one of its areas of expertise. So she was speaking about the need to have greater access to broadband. It was funny because we haven't heard much about it at the state level. So
yeah, I mean, there's lots of conversations about needing to get it to Indian reservations, which I think is important as well. But for a state to not have access to it is equally as critical.
Yep.
I mean, I think in my perspective, the bottom line is stated right within the legislation that was presented, and that's that, per capita, we have more fiber backbone existing in the state of Rhode Island than any other state, but we have less people connected to it. And we're one of only 2 states that doesn't have that broadband coordinator position, which makes us ineligible for most of the federal funding that is paying for this elsewhere. So, my problem with the makeup of the committee in the legislation, I already sent this to Commerce. It's very simple. They have representation from the Newport County Chamber of Commerce and the Providence Chamber of Commerce, but none of the other chambers. So my opinion on that was either have every chamber represented or have no chambers represented. So pretty simple.
And this is Rep. Ruggiero's bill, not Commerce's bill. So send it to us and we can make sure we talk to her about it.
Okay.
If you would, thanks.
That was, this is exciting news. I skipped meals tax. I guess it was hiding and then we scrolled through. So the meals tax create greater transparency in collections, taxation, commerce, share usable data sets, help track economic recovery and loss of businesses. This has been something we've been after forever, why we cannot have access to the information about where that meals tax revenue is coming from, whether it's by street or individual business, whether they want to be identified or not. It's important to know. And also during COVID, it would have been important to be able to track that information and see that information in regard to how our businesses are doing, who we've lost, or, you know, who's thrived. It seems it's strange to me that we do not have access to that critical information. And we had talked about including, or we had included needing that kind of information on a permit that we issued. Didn't we ask for something from one of the beverage taxes? Oh, with the cigar store last year, just to sort of track how they were doing. Anyway, I hope we can see some greater transparency in that regard going forward. It's important data for us to have.
Well,
I think
we
you
also,
have
Jason.
we also don't even know if we're getting our fair share, because something, I mean, there was a situation where we weren't getting what we were supposed to get, but we didn't really even know it because it wasn't being reported, so.
Exactly. A couple of years ago, somebody was paying into the wrong account, and we didn't find out until we got this big, huge check. And, you know, we just didn't know. And that's doesn't work.
So the changing winds up at the State House may help the town with this. I don't know if Stephen Pryor and his administration is going to stay at Commerce or not, but, you know, Lieutenant Governor McKee, say what you will, there is no question that he is someone who wants to help small business thrive. So if the town of Warren comes to his Commerce Department and says, we can do a better job of tracking the health of our small businesses if we have this data, somehow I think it will happen.
We can also try to do it legislatively, right? Just require that these reports be issued by the executive branch agency. We can give that a talk, colleagues.
Right now, we do have a pool going on the tenure of Secretary Pryor.
Wow.
I'm in.
Kate, if you you know the details on that stuff, you know, and I'm sure it's very technical, but a bill's a way to go to it as well. You know, make that stuff available. I often, sometimes I think bills like that are a little bit of dead letters, because we can pass a bill, but making it actually turn into reality through the agency can be difficult sometimes. But it would be a start. But we would need some help drafting that, because I don't know specifically nuts and bolts what you're looking for, where it's found, that kind of thing, to draft
Sure.
up the language.
And I don't think it needs to be terribly complicated. And,
Right.
you know, I think we're just looking for general data. Even as Council President Cronin mentioned, I don't think we even care if we know specifically what business it's tied to. You know, whatever identifier they want to provide, just that it's broken down by business so that we can see whether that business is functioning or not, basically.
Well, I'm of the opinion that if we're gonna draft legislation because we can't get a state agency to do something, I want it to be detailed enough so that somebody who's enterprising can walk into court and tell a Superior Court judge, this is what I want, and have them ordered to do it. I mean, it's getting to that point with these state agencies, whether it's inertia, and that's really what I think it is sometimes. They need to be able to, we need to have specific statutes so that they can hop to if somebody in a black robe orders them to do something. That's how I think about drafting stuff like that.
Sure. I'd be happy to send you what, in an ideal world, what all the things that would be included. And then you could take it from there, I think.
Yeah. And sometimes even the bill is enough to scare them into doing the right thing.
Good.
Yeah, with the PFAS bill that I'm working on, that's what we're doing. We're trying to get better information about which substances are in groundwater and surface water from DEM and DOH. So this is all about imposing reporting requirements on state agencies. They aren't doing it, so we're going to have to require that they do it legislatively. But Rep. Knight's right. It's often an uphill climb, but I think it's better to require it than to hope for it.
Okay. Next, affordable housing. We've heard from a few of you already on this topic. Consider supporting enabling legislation that would allow for local ordinances to increase housing opportunity and support formation of a study committee to review and modernize the state's land use laws, including the outdated definition of affordable housing. Rep. Speakman, I would imagine you have probably the most experience in this area, just given the work that you've done in the past. It is frustrating how much that housing we have here that is affordable, that doesn't meet the criteria of the quote unquote affordable housing, can't be included in our minimum. It's just seems like a roadblock that how is that opened up? How do we go about making this work better for us?
Yeah, that's tough because the 10% requirement was, and the 30-year deed restriction and all of those technical details were put on to encourage strongly suburban communities to sort of share the burden of having low mod housing in their communities. It's a muscular bill, you're absolutely right. And looking at the deed restriction and other things is I think, important, but it's very difficult to do, sort of given the urban suburban balance in the General Assembly. A bunch of folks are interested in working on housing. Can you tell me what the first piece means, to allow for local ordinances to increase housing opportunity?
So I think it's still exactly to be determined. It's my understanding that the Massachusetts Municipal Association is putting together a package of bills in the state of Massachusetts aimed at allowing for more flexibility on the local level, you know, to provide for affordable housing, maybe in a little bit different way than the state enabling legislation requires it to be done. So I think this is just a general, in my perspective, this is just a general statement, and I don't have a specific ask that's tied to it at this point. But you know, just to keep an eye on it in the future, and if the potential exists to give us a little bit more flexibility in the way that we approve affordable housing projects specifically, then that would be something that's beneficial to getting it done.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we're talking about the affordable housing, you know, personally, my experience with affordable housing is that the deed restriction isn't necessarily a problem, and I definitely see the value in the deed restriction, because then you do have that reliably affordable unit. In my opinion, the problem is linking it to the government subsidy, because I've seen projects where the developer can make it work as an affordable project without that government subsidy, and they don't want to wait for the government subsidy because that process is so burdensome and time consuming, but it doesn't count as affordable unless they get that subsidy.
Madam President, may I?
You may, yes.
So I have 2 points of reference with respect to this issue. As many of you know, we have an ongoing comprehensive permit application for Settlers Green at Denver Ave, Kennecott Avenue. There are 2 4-story apartment buildings included in that. There are a number of infrastructure issues that have come up, and one has to do with the amount of water flow for fire protection to meet the federal requirements. And the developer, you know, initially said this is a type 3 building. The fire chief and the fire marshal looked at it and said, you know, you need X amount of flow for X amount of hours to meet this. And they came back and said, oh, no, it's going to be a type this building. And so I went to Rhode Island Housing. And I said, do you care that move from a type 3 to a type 5 is a budget increase? And you've issued a letter of eligibility based on a pro forma that showed one type of construction. Now we're going to a much more expensive form of construction. And their response to me was, no, we don't care. We don't look at that. That's not part of our underwriting. That's a problem. And then last night we have another comprehensive permit application for a development for a not rental home ownership on the corner of Milbert and Main Street, where under Rhode Island housing requirements, People eligible for housing in that project, 4 of those units would be eligible, are at 120% of area median income. 120% of area median income for that location is $109,000 a year. The price for those units would have to be $336,000. There's not a house in that surrounding area that is assessed for that. So, I mean, there's big inconsistencies in terms of, how Rhode Island Housing does their computations. And the fact that every one of those surrounding areas that has multifamilies, every one of those units under that criteria would be eligible to be considered affordable. And it's just, I don't understand, what their thinking is in terms of, this is a very good project. The fact that it has home ownership, but the fact that we're not able to count existing units that are eligible, except for the fact they're not Section 8, qualify as affordable, and that doesn't go towards our 10%, is ridiculous.
The other point that you could remember in all of these discussions, and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, 20 years ago, the definition of affordable housing was set, tied to the voucher. Now, I feel like the reality of an affordable housing by the voucher has increased all of the rent stock in town.
Yeah, absolutely.
If a 2-bedroom apartment you can get $1,200 or $1,400 from affordable housing, where the hell do us poor people who aren't on affordable housing live?
I mean, I think that to that point, Joe, I mean, if you talk to Michael Bruzzi, the fact that these vouchers, you can take them anywhere, we can't fulfill the requirement for vouchers in Warren. We don't have enough units that qualify to meet all of the inspection tests in Warren. So somebody can get a voucher in Warren and they can go anywhere in the state that they want to go with that voucher.
Right.
And that's not what these programs were set up to do.
Thank you.
Have your lawyers draft what you want up and give it to us so we can submit it and start the conversation. I'm happy
to draft it. I don't need a lawyer to draft it. This is.
Well, I'm serious. I'm serious.
We'll send you a resolution.
I don't want resolutions are fine, but I'm not an expert in this area. So if Tony DeSisto and his people sit down and draft up the definition that you want, right, and can fit it in and make it harmonious with the rest of the affordable housing statutes, so that it's an easier sell up on the State House, let's do it and see if we can make something happen. We at least have to start the conversation, because the same issues are not the same issues, because they're 2 different towns. But I know Barrington is frustrated with the current definition.
The threshold that it has to be a deed restricted unit is the problem. I mean, there are, and again, I remember when we met last year on a Saturday, Mr. Hanley brought this up. If you did a census of what rents are, particularly in our downtown area, a majority of those are well below the threshold for less than 80% area median income affordable. And the fact that
be an affordable housing, it can't be affordable housing unless it has it in the deed.
It has that deed restriction, and that's
well,
just
let's
ridiculous.
Change that.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Don't get your hopes up.
And again, I mean, I know that the builders, and people have a strong lobby on that, but people are being disenfranchised because of it.
Yeah, there's got to be another way to address this problem, but if you remove the deed restriction, there is nothing to stop someone from coming in 2 years later and rehabbing the building and doubling the rent.
I think the deed restriction can stay in place for people that are receiving funding through Rhode Island Housing. I think that's appropriate, but to not allow the census of existing units by private owners that are not taking advantage of Rhode Island Housing, to not have that be counted, that's the problem that I have.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, exactly. That if you leave the deed restrictions on any new developments, that's not a problem. They know what they're getting into when they get there. but allow us to count all of our affordable housing stock. I bet you we're not even allowed to count 10% of it. So that's the tricky part. If you can, the deed restriction is fine on new developments, but the existing tenements that have the three families and they easily meet the affordable housing requirements for rent payments, I think those should count.
Right. I mean, if you look at the calculation performed, under the formula, Warren has much less affordable housing than East Greenwich. And we know that that's just not the case on the ground.
So I think the end of this conversation is that we need to work on the language and the legalese of how we'd like to see it and present it to our legislators for some review and feedback and see if we can make this happen, because this has just been an ongoing issue for so long. So let's do that.
And my personal opinion is that I think the Rhode Island Builders Association could be an ally in this if things are approached the right way. I mean, for so many years, municipalities and the Rhode Island Builders Association have been at loggerheads on everything having to do with housing. But I really think we have a lot of the same goals, and now is the time to just acknowledge that more housing is needed and more affordable housing is needed, and how do we get that done?
I think to Mr. Hanley's point, many of you may have seen today, I mean, we're talking about what we're looking to do on Metacom, just at the Job Lot Plaza, the number of housing units we can create there. And I don't like to use affordable housing. I like to use mixed income, but to the extent that any funding is coming from Rhode Island housing or subsidized, then absolutely it's appropriate to have a deed restriction, because that is a subsidy that is helping a project. But the fact that on Wood Street or any of those neighborhoods, on Hope Street, on Noble Street, on Park Street, there are a surplus of 2 and 3 family units on those streets that I'm sure that those rents are well below what the market rate is. And they may not be looking for Section 8 because they don't want to go through the hassle of the inspections, but I bet you that a majority of that is safe, decent housing. I know there are exceptions, but that would meet the requirement of that being affordable housing.
And the whole goal here is to avoid that 10% so that we don't have these fast track situations. Is that what we're getting?
Right. I mean, I think that the project last night that was presented, I mean, that's a good project. And I appreciate the fact that it's home ownership. I think the Settlers Green application is clearly just taking advantage of the comprehensive permit legislation. And that was not what the intention of that was.
Exactly.
Not sure about that, but yeah, I mean, right, Brent, the comprehensive permit is a way for communities to get to the 10% quickly, except it doesn't do that because it keeps pushing out the denominator, the numerator, one of those things. So you can never, and Barrington had this problem, right?
Rep speaking for the Settlers Green project, in the Kickamuit River Overlay District, Reservoir Overlay District, where there is a lot coverage requirement of 25%, and you have a project that wants to push it to 47%.
Yep.
And there's questionable infrastructure access. I mean, that is clearly just a flagrant abuse of that ordinance.
Oh yeah, it's been abused all over the state. I agree with you.
And it's not even going to move the needle towards our 10%.
It doesn't move.
It's not even going to be.
It doesn't even move 1%.
Right.
Yeah,
That's my point. Right. That's my point.
Less than 0.5%.
That's my point. That's my point. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be quiet.
We need what, 485 or 5? How many units do we need?
Yeah, over 400.
Yeah.
If we are going on the deed restricted, I mean, it's.
And subsidized. They have to be both deed restricted and subsidized, right?
Either or.
Yeah. No, both and. I think both and.
Yeah.
Both. If you have a Section 8 and you're renting an apartment, that's a deed restriction on the property.
Yeah, I don't think they need to be both. I think it just needs
That's
to
right.
be one or the other.
Right. Yeah.
It has to be both. In our Section 8 units that are in buildings that are not deed restricted don't count towards our 10%. So most of our Section 8 voucher properties don't count.
Unbelievable.
That's right.
Do you have a number on how many of those there are? or an idea?
No, but we could find out because we do get a breakout every year of how many units fall under which type.
Michelle
Maybe we
Maha and Michael did a ton of investigative research on that. I'm sure the files are available.
And just so you know, there's sort of no debate about what you're saying, about the impact of this legislation on small town housing policy. Everybody understands that this is what the consequences are. And again, when I was in Barrington, we had 2 developments that went through this process. And it is, the legislation is trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all to accomplish what it's supposed to accomplish. Yes, there are more affordable units in suburban communities, but they aren't getting to the 10%. And
The last point I would make on this, and when I worked in Arlington County, Virginia, we did this quite often, is, we approve projects based on floor area ratios, so density. But, we would allow additional density if a developer would include X number of affordable units in a project, and they were seamless. You didn't know that which ones were affordable or not. And, I think to the point of the state looking at legislation, we need that flexibility to be able to do that. It's workforce housing. If $108,000 under Rhode Island housing qualifies you for affordable housing, I can tell you right now that I qualify for that housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
probably not actually, but that's okay.
I don't make $108,000.
Yeah, but that's, yeah, okay. Anyways, we committed not to get into the weeds on this, right? So there is going to be work going on about this. I don't know if there's anything happening on the Senate side. I know there are a couple of newly elected senators who are interested in working on this legislation.
But I mean, and I'll be quiet in a minute, but to the extent that every time, and I'll go to my CDBG platform now, every time there's CDBG funding, there's always an affordable housing complex, part of that. And, why are we doing that? I mean, this is insane. I mean, we're saying CDBG is going to have X amount of money for affordable housing. We know that's going to go to 3 or 4 communities. None of that is ever going to come to Warren, but that's the easy place for them to go. And we need to address that. I mean, there are ways. We don't need CDBG money sometimes. We could, if we had the flexibility to do things on our own, we could do that, but it's the easy place to go. And I don't understand it. And, I'm hoping with, a new governor that is in tune to what municipalities need and is upset with how Commerce has treated municipalities, that there's some kind of fundamental change. But to Rep. Speakman and Knight, prior to Christmas, we were hoping to have a conversation with Commerce with respect to what was happening with the CDBG money that came from the feds in August or September. We never had that conversation. We hear now that they're still trying to get RFPs out. We're almost into February. I mean, this is ridiculous. That's not okay.
Thank you for that enlightenment. Unless anybody has more to add on affordable housing, we can go to policing and support amendments of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights in concert with Police Chiefs Association. Manager Michaud brought this up. We discussed this earlier. I think she could probably explain best what this would really be getting at. And
where's Mr. Calenda? Anybody see Mr. Calenda?
I'm right here, Joe.
Oh,
I've
good.
lost the ability to see everybody.
I thought you left, Steve.
Nope, I'm here, Joe. You told me to be quiet, so I stopped talking.
Oh, I'm sorry you took it that way. I didn't tell you to be quiet.
It's okay. I'll wait to respond on the policing issue and the law enforcement bill of rights. Go ahead, Kate, bring us up to speed.
Kate?
Kate, you're on mute.
So sorry about that. There's plenty of discussion about policing, and certainly I'm not a police expert, and I won't put myself out as one, but I think the Police Chiefs Association put together a comprehensive list of reforms associated with the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. A lot of them deal with, specifically extending the ability of time that someone can be suspended to 10 days without having to go to the hearing board, looking at the makeup of that hearing board, possibly to change that, and creating greater transparency in the hearing process. Those were three of the things that the Police Chiefs Association had included, and it seems like there's a lot of consensus around those items, at least with the members of the League of Cities and Towns, and also with those police. And then just the second point, talking about body cams, one of the commitments of the Police Chiefs Association was to fully investigate the potential to implement body cameras in all of the Rhode Island municipalities. Our police department, just like every other police department, is looking into the feasibility of that, and we're finding that the cost is very high. It's not just the acquisition cost, because obviously there are grants available, federal grants for the acquisition of equipment, potentially. But it's the ongoing maintenance costs. Just to back up those cameras, the cost that we received as a quote was $100 per officer per month, just to back them up and keep that footage securely held. So, if we have 22 officers, that's, over $26,000 a year just in maintenance costs, and that assumes that nothing breaks or needs to be replaced. So we will be bringing that to the council this year as part of the budget process, just to provide the information of what it would cost. And but it seems like every city and town is kind of approaching this individually, and if this is a state priority, or if it's determined to be a state priority, that there could be some way to do some kind of statewide coordination to bring these costs down and make it an actual feasible thing for the smaller municipalities that don't have the budgets of a Providence or the bigger cities.
Kate, is that the total cost, or is that a separate cost for the body cam itself?
That's a separate cost just to maintain the footage from the body cam.
Right, and what is the actual cost of the body cam?
I don't have that number yet. We're working on getting it, but I'll have that in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I guess is that even a necessary cost for the town of Warren? I mean, I'd rather almost see that money go into some other areas of community outreach when it comes to things that policing can't handle. There's many situations where it's been proven that social type workers would be a better solution from a mental health standpoint when people are having problems. And I think Steve can speak to this, but I think the police officers will tell you that they're sent into situations where they really don't think they're fully trained and capable of handling it, and so you wonder if something like this real expense for body cams, is it really necessary, and could that money be utilized in a better way in our community?
As far as mental health, we're definitely approaching that issue as well. We had a meeting today with the East Bay Recovery Center, looking at, actually Bristol is starting a safe station out of their police department, where someone can go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when they want to receive help, and they're all set to, the police department would call East Bay Recovery Center, who would send a peer recovery specialist right away to get that person the help that they need. We also partner with BH Link, so this is, part of that program where we do have the ability, like every other city and town, if we have someone who's in mental health crisis, they can be transported to BH Link instead of to the hospital. And we're trying to create more awareness in the public that that's available, because our biggest problem has been that maybe the people don't know what services are available. They don't want to go because they don't know what it means. And I think we're moving in the right direction on that topic. So I don't think it necessarily has to be an either or, but it's certainly something that'll require discussion in the future. And Bristol really is, we're going to follow what they're doing, with great interest, because they will be the first municipality to run the Safe Station program out of the police department. Whereas in the other, in Providence, it's run out of fire departments. But with Bristol and Warren being volunteer fire departments, there's another model that's needed. So.
Okay, any other comments on this topic from council or legislators?
Madam President, if I may have a brief moment.
You may.
Thanks. Hey, Kate, thanks. Great job bringing forward. I was doing some research and looking into what the police chiefs are actually putting out. They came out with their 20 for 2020 points that they were trying to make in the Police Officers Bill of Rights was number 15. Legislators, you just want to keep in mind that some of these things that the police chiefs want to put forward are a little bit on the draconian side. If they're looking to, take a number of 2 and turn it into a number of 10, that's a big ask. The bottom line is this: years ago, the legislator or the governor's office eliminated the college incentive, the educational incentive. There's no incentive for these individuals who are still on the job to get educated other than being reimbursed. State of Massachusetts has had the Quinn bill for many years now. I am not 100% sure if they're looking to eliminate it or not. But a few years back, probably I was still on the job, I was watching a legislative session, and it was happened to be in Massachusetts, and they were talking about the Quinn bill. And the numbers of police brutality cases that they had were so insignificant, and it was based on the training and the education. If you want to put money somewhere, put it behind training and education. As far as the body cams go, Kate, you're 100% right. The cost is astronomical. Before, one of my friends just recently retired, they were looking into it at the state police level, and they said not only is the cost astronomical to store the data, but to have everybody trained and upfront, and the legal teams they would need to combat the issues with the body cams is just beyond feasible. So I would agree with Brant. I would rather see monies put into other programs that could help us, individuals that are policing in the 21st century, to be able to do their job based on training and education.
Thank you, Councilman Kalenda. Well stated. I would agree. I would rather see that type of money go towards training, educational, counseling, those kind of efforts over additional hardware that will likely become obsolete. I mean, technology changes so quickly. The notion of that kind of investment just does not seem to sit well with me. So we have covered, I believe, Kate, is that the bottom of that list?
That is, so I will stop sharing.
So that is, we've made it through the manager's suggestions. Do any members of the council have anything further from a legislative perspective they would like to see our leaders here focus on? Wow, great. Rep Knight, Jason, do you have something to say?
I just, I so appreciate these sort of legislative priority meetings when we have them. And I just want to express my thanks to the powers that be for organizing and setting this up. And for anyone on the call and anyone watching on YouTube, it's just important for me to reiterate, I try to be as responsive as I can. So if you get a question or about something I said tonight or about an issue that's up at the State House, reach out. That's why I'm here. I'm the rep.
Thank you. Well, as she generally does, and not to put you on the spot, Kate. We usually get a really concise and detailed follow-up on these type of meetings. I think we've got a lot of a nice long to-do list and some good stuff to go off of from this evening. I look forward to seeing that and moving forward on some of these items, and then hearing back from our legislators upon their appointments to committees as that happens, and progress on our priorities.
Great.
If I could interject one thing, as we move on in the General Assembly session, there's approximately 2,400 bills that are submitted on a yearly basis. And if any of those impact our fire department, our police department, or some department within the town of Warren, can you bring that to our attention? Especially those that may impact our volunteer fire department. It's important.
Yeah, we do appreciate hearing about any bills or upcoming legislation that impacts us, like the broadband one that came forward today, which apparently Kate knew about before you did. So that is always good information to have. So we don't need a motion to adjourn.
Nope.
Does everybody has said what they need to say?
Yeah, I want to say I'm sorry to Steve. I didn't mean to.
Oh, Joe, it's fine. I was just pulling your leg.
All right. Well, my intention was more of trying to figure out what we were going to do this night. I may have come across a little abrupt. I apologize.
It's all set, Joe. No worries.
Thank you. And I want
Anytime.
to thank Jessica and Sandy and Haley for being there for us.
You beat me to the punch there. Yeah, thank you all for being here this evening and for help in supporting Make This Happen. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. See ya. Take care.